was exactly this, because he built his life basically on what he wanted. No foundation. You know, this is as true in relationships as it is in structures. And that's really what he's telling us here in this passage. We have to understand in marriage that everything in the relationship flows out of that spiritual foundation that we have in our individual lives. And obviously, I'm here speaking primarily to you men, because it's on you to set that example, set that tone, and be that example according to God. He structured it this way. You know, we're most of us, very aware of the fact that we have the responsibility to be the provider, the protector, all those things, right? See, that carries over into the spiritual arena as well. And one of the things that I feel like we all need to be reminded of on a fairly regular basis, because we seem to forget it, is that we have a duty to be the spiritual protector, the spiritual leader, the spiritual foundation builder in our homes and in our families. I would venture to say that there's not a man in this room who would hesitate to step up and physically protect wife and children, those we love. And we fail miserably in the spiritual arena much of the time. And think this thing through with me. One of those duties is a temporal duty. And here's what I mean by that. If my wife dies, somebody were to run her off the road or intentionally take her life, she immediately goes from here into the presence of Jesus. She's immediately actually beginning life, right? We know that it's just a transition. But if we don't do our jobs, if we don't fulfill our duty as men, you know, with the people we love with regard to their spiritual health and well-being, the repercussions are eternal, never ending. That's a consequence that's never going to go away. And we need to remember that. We need to take this stuff seriously. You know, out of that spiritual foundation, everything else flows in our lives. You know, talking about the subject of marriage and marital relationships, my wife says most women long for more affection and most men long for more sex. I think there's truth to that. We're geared differently. We're wired differently. And many of us as men don't really know what to do with that entirely. What is it exactly that she's in need of? You know, I remember one time when we first got married. I don't think we shared this last night. Elisbet and I have been married about 6 months or so, and or less. I don't know, but we're sitting in our little living room, our little apartment, and she looks over at me and says, "Robert, do you think we could just stay home tonight, be together, not go anywhere? Because we haven't been together all week." And I thought to myself, okay, number one, we haven't left this apartment all week, except for me going to work and coming home. So I'm not quite sure what she's talking about here. We haven't been anywhere. We haven't been separated. And I said, okay, sure, we can do that. But honey, we've been together all week. I don't understand. She said, no, we haven't. We haven't been together at all. I said, sweetheart, last night, all night long, you sat right there in that chair, and I sat right here in this chair, and we were together all night. She said, yes, you sat right there in that chair and read your book. I sat right here in this chair and read my book. We weren't together at all. I said, well, what did you want me to do? Gaze into your eyes all night? And she said, yes. And that's when it clicked with me that we have a completely different understanding of what it means to be together, right? And I still, we joke about it, and it's something I still struggle with. But a couple of things that I realized, we did talk about last night how I would come home to poetry, right? And I finally explained to her that poetry is not my love language, Sweet tea is my love language. That works for me, have something like that ready for me. But what I also had to learn is that for her, the reason she was meeting me at the front door with poetry is that she needed to connect at a level that I didn't know we were disconnected. Just, right over my head. I didn't realize that for her there was a disconnect. Now later on, she started using a code phrase, that I picked up on. She said, I miss you. And she'd say it, and I'd be like, at first I'm like, I haven't been anywhere. And she's like, yes, you have. Up here, you have. You haven't been with me all night long. I don't know where you are, but it's not right here. And she'd say, I miss you. And at first, guys, like many, I get defensive. What do you want me to do? I mean, I got a job. I can't just be sitting here all day. Back in the beginning, I worked outside the church. So I had, 2 or 3 things going. Then when I started with the chaplaincy, later, I had a full-time job. We had the church, and then I had the, 500 employee police department. And I had a lot going on. But I had to realize that what she was talking about more than anything else was the connection. And it was as simple as this, guys. The minute I walked in the door, I needed to connect with her. Just 5 minutes. I realized just 5 minutes of real connection with her. Eye contact, focused attention, what's going on in your world, what's happening in your mind and your heart right now. Because here's what, if I'm not really careful to this day, now 23 years later, here's what will happen. I come in the front door, and the very first person to greet me is our bull mastiff. He's still a puppy. He's 9 months old, weighs about 110 pounds, so I have to pay attention, because he's a puppy that weighs 110 pounds. He comes in and he tucks his head over like this, and he starts prancing, and the tail's going and all of that, and he's just as cute as he can be. But if I don't pay him attention, he's going to reach out and grab some part of me. You understand what I'm saying? It's like he's going to have some attention. So, yeah, she is learning from. But do you see what I'm saying? He will grab my attention, and she's standing there looking. It was like
he spent his attention.
Hello,
it's gone.
I'm your wife.
Yeah.
And I'll blow right past her, headed for my iced tea. You see what just happened? She's standing there feeling just completely rejected by her husband. It's not my intention. But it's exactly what we do many times, because we take, so often we take for granted, gentlemen, the person that we love most in the world. She's just supposed to understand. Well, listen to me carefully. She don't. She does not understand. She needs ministry from you. And that's the way I learned to see this and understand it, is that I have a duty to meet certain needs that my wife has, which are legitimate. They're God-given. They're real. They're not the same as mine. I don't necessarily, I don't just automatically, naturally understand them. But I have a duty, according to Scripture, to learn, to understand what hers are. Because everybody's different. Every individual, every female, every male, right? We see relationships where this is reversed. I had to be honest, one of the most difficult discussions that I've ever had as a pastor. It happened almost 20 years ago. And this this guy was miserable. He'd been married almost 30 years. And he said, but we're emotionally divorced. We have no relationship. You know, our kids are grown, and we get up in the morning, and, you know, we both have full-time jobs, and we have breakfast together, and she sits over there and reads the paper, and I sit over here, I read a paper, and we finish breakfast, we do the dishes, we'll go off to work, we come home in the afternoon, and same kind of deal, you know, we sit here and have dinner together after we do the dishes, and maybe we watch the news, or she reads a book, I read it. We never talk about anything. He said, we don't argue or fight or anything because we never even talk. And she thinks everything's fine. Now, see, usually you hear that the other way, right? Usually it's the wife who's wanting a lot more interaction than she's getting from the husband. In that situation, it was the husband saying, we don't ever talk about anything. And she's okay with that, but I don't know what to do. I'm not okay with it. But the bottom line is we need to understand each other. We need to work on it. We need to realize. Because I used to say to her in the beginning, I would say to her, she'd come to me with like the example I gave a minute ago. We haven't been together all week. And my reaction, that's not true. And I had to learn that, wait a minute, there's something I'm missing. I'm missing something. From her perspective, we haven't been together all week. So what is it that she's actually communicating? And I had to learn, you know, how to dig into that a little bit. How to interview her, for lack of a better way to put it. What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you saying? What is it that I'm not understanding here? And especially because we have a slight difference. You know, Elisbet's Danish. Her first language is not English. And sometimes the wording of things, I've realized, will be a little different. Sometimes she doesn't understand. Like she would tell her friends that Robert loves to shop. She'd make me mad as fire. I do not love to shop. I enjoy walking in the mall because it's air conditioned. Right? But shopping, I'm not. No. Listen. Nobody's trying to get you not to be the man. Be the man. Just recognize that maybe your idea of what it means to be the man, maybe there's more to it than you've embraced. You have duties that maybe you've not really grabbed onto. And, excuse me, you need to give her the freedom to be the woman, like we talked about yesterday. Let mama be mama. You know, don't try to, you don't want her making you one of her girlfriends. Well, don't try to make her one of the boys either. She's not. She's not. Now, she may enjoy, that's great. You know, I know a lot of ladies that enjoy going hunting and, enjoy, the football. I've got a good friend. His wife loves football. He's a soccer guy. He rugby and soccer because of where he grew up. But do you see what I'm saying? But let her be who she is, and don't try to reshape her. Instead, you work at understanding who she actually is. And then what are your ministry responsibilities to her? What are the needs that God, they're God-given, or maybe they're not God-given. Maybe they're just part of who she is. Like we talked about last night. Every single one of us has issues. Elisbet was raped as a young woman. Well, do you understand that affected us in the beginning of our marriage? And I had to understand that. I had to be patient with that. I had to get to know that part of her. I shot a girl when I was 11 years old. I got some baggage. I had all kinds of things happen between the age of 11 and 24 when I got saved. There are things in there that in the beginning I couldn't even talk to her about some of it. There are things that happened to me in my childhood that I didn't tell one single soul until this year. I'm 56 years old. I didn't talk about those things because it's stuff you don't talk about if you're a man. You don't let people into that. But see, that doesn't work. At some point, the old saying, you don't have to tell everybody everything, but you better tell somebody everything. We need to be willing to be known for who we really are, and we need to know each other. We need to listen to each other. 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. Wives, Be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward. It's not saying don't adorn outwardly. He's saying don't stop there. Arranging the hair, wearing gold, putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, which, by the way, you can only develop in that relationship with the Lord Jesus. The incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. Now, see, ladies, you got to see that. The Bible said God values that gentle, quiet spirit. So do your husbands. Proverbs has quite a lot to say about the opposite, right? Most famous one, Proverbs 21:9. Better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. But see, men, this is where we have to step up and work at it. 1 Peter 3:7 says, husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding. Again, there's that duty. There's that duty. Figure it out, is what God says to you as a man. She is your duty. She is your responsibility. Understand what those needs are. Don't be dismissive. Are you being ridiculous? No, she's not. She's being who she is, and you have a duty to understand that. You have a duty not to brush that aside. You have a God-given responsibility to figure that out and to minister to her in those areas. Dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. I'll be honest with you, I don't understand that last part. I don't know why God says that your prayers are hindered if you don't fulfill this duty. It's pretty black and white. That is what He is saying right here. Dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. You know, Ken Graves, Calvary Chapel, Bangor, is a good friend, and he does a great job explaining this passage, that it's not a negative value statement concerning the female of the species. In fact, quite the opposite. He says, you know, us men we're like the old, just rugged clay jar, you know, that you kind of get banged up or whatever. It's not that big a deal. But the ladies are more like that extremely valuable little china teacup that you give honor, but recognizing that there's a fragility there that God never intended us to have as men. We're supposed to take some lumps, but we're supposed to take those lumps protecting that fine porcelain teacup that He entrusted to us. Give honor to her and understand, you know, and like I said earlier, don't try to turn her into one of your buddies. You know, we do that sometimes. The way, you know, if you speak to your wife in the same way that you would speak to, you know, your hunting buddies or your bowling team, or that's just wrong. There's something not quite right with that. You know, we need to understand that one of the things that we ran into early on, you know, in my dad's family, he had two brothers. He has an older brother that's only like a year and a half older than him, and civil conversation between them is at this level usually, and it's with this kind of intensity and demeanor. You know, it's like you think they're getting ready to kill each other. Any second they're going to come to blows. You know, it's like, because no matter what Frank says, my dad is going to disagree with it. My mom used to say he'd argue with a tree if there was nobody else around, because it's just part of the makeup, part of the family dynamic. So when we got married, our dinner meals, if she said anything at all, that, you know, my brow would immediately wrinkle up and my voice would elevate, and her response would be, "Stop yelling at me. I'm not yelling." That sound familiar? I'm sure it does to some of you. Listen, we have to understand that from her perspective, you are yelling. Just drop it down. Lower the voice a little bit. Calm down. You see what I mean? We have to respect the duty that we have to the women that God has entrusted to us, because it's not the thing that we talked about this years ago, because we were at a marriage, first one we'd ever done, a marriage retreat, and it registered with her some of these things about men, and she realized, I need to, for the sake of my son, I need to get this. For the sake of your daughters and your granddaughters, you need to get this. You know, I told you our bull mastiff, we've had a couple. The first one we adopted, he was 2 years old when we got him, and we took him. Lincoln Road in South Beach is it's just a shopping street. So it's close to traffic, and the people, you know, you walk your dogs, and people are out just socializing, and we're walking, and the first one, his name was Bodacious. It suited him. And we're walking along. He's big, you know, we're walking along, and I'm doing my best to, he wasn't leash trained. I never did get him to where he would walk with me. He always thought he was leading me. And the first time we took him to Lincoln Road, there was this little, 3-4-year-old girl all the way across on the other side of Lincoln Road. So she's a good, 30 yards away. And he loved kids. So he got excited, you know. He's looking at her and kind of dancing, you know. And she looked over at him, just burst into tears. She started crying because he was a mean-looking dog, you know. And all she saw was this big, scary-looking dog. Do you understand? Sometimes that's what we do to the women in our lives, guys. I'm serious. This is what we do to the women in our lives. We don't intend it. We can't really comprehend it. You know, it occurred to me a few years ago that some people's initial perception of me is not at all in harmony with the way I see myself. I know what a sweet guy I am. But I don't necessarily always look so sweet. Right? My face is all scarred up. If I've got just a little bit of stubble, and like this morning, I woke up with a bad headache that I've been fighting real hard, taking right now the maximum amount of Tylenol and Advil that I feel safe taking, And, if I'm not feeling well and my voice kind of drops down an octave and the scars and the stubble, and I can be a little intimidating, even if I am a small guy. And I have to be aware, especially with kids and with the women that God has entrusted to my care, that what I know about me doesn't really matter. What matters is the effect that I have on them. Because that's what He cares about. Are you doing your duty to these women? Ephesians 5:29. One final thing, something that just occurred to me a while back, because I think every one of it, we want to be that knight in shining armor, right? I mean, we want our wives to trust us, to respect us, and to treat us like you are my man, you're my hero. And it hit me like this: you want her to treat you like a king, you better speak to her like a princess. And that's really what we're talking about. Lower your voice. Speak a little bit more softly. And let me clarify something, too, the thing about affection. Because a lot of times for us, it's foreplay. That's not what she's after. What she's after is knowing that she matters to you. And I've realized that one of the things for this one, the thing that she needs most from me, is this. It's simple. It doesn't cost me anything. It's not that complicated. It's that simple touch to the face like that. If I'll do that in the morning or at night, trust me, I'm getting points right now. You understand what I'm saying? Because that's a God-given need. That's legitimate. That's legitimate. Now, don't you come doing that to me. I don't even like her doing that to me most of the time. It's just like, you know, need my space.
You're messing up my hair.
It's an old joke. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. What does that mean? What it means is it's not about you. I make it about me. It's not about me. My duty to her is about her. You understand what I'm saying? My duty to her, it's about her. It's about what she thinks, about what she feels, about what she needs. It's not about me. Just like with Jesus, it wasn't about him. You know, well, think about that. What would it be like? You know, I heard the funniest story at the conference out in California recently. Bud Stonebreaker from Calvary Chapel, one of the Calvary Chapels in Hawaii. I don't know which one, Honolulu or which one, but he talked about, you know, how you go in a restaurant sometimes, and sometimes you get great service and sometimes not so much, right? Sometimes the waiter seems to be just a little bit preoccupied, sometimes just a little bit irritated even. And he said, what would it be like now? I mean, the whole point when you go in a restaurant and their job is to serve you and be focused on your needs, not on their needs. And what if the waiter, you know, were to come to the table and say, you know what, I don't think I even want to bring you anything to drink because you don't even care about me. You're not even concerned with what I'm dealing with right now. And you'd be like, you lost your mind? And he said, furthermore, what if Jesus did that? What if that had been his posture? He, you know, came to earth. He's left everything behind. He set everything aside. He comes to earth. Everybody rejects him. And what if he had just said, you people don't even care about me. Why do I need to be concerned with you? Because you don't even believe I am who I am. You're not the least bit concerned with what I'm feeling right now. I mean, how absurd is that, right? But that's what this passage is saying to us as husbands. Love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her that he might sanctify, set her apart from everybody else and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. Now, guys, that one word right there has helped me a lot. Cherish your wife. Cherish your wife. Think about what it means. Make it something that you pray about, that you meditate on. You know, love her like Jesus loves you, sacrificially, with patient acceptance. Even if you don't understand it, if you find yourself saying to her, you're exaggerating, that's not true, you're being silly, you're being ridiculous, you know, whatever, put yourself in check and ask yourself this one question: what am I missing? Something's not right. Something's not right here right now. What is it that I'm missing? How do I serve her? How do I deal appropriately with her right now in a way that's going to minister to her? Do you ever think about the fact that Jesus had all the same needs and desires that you do, and he set them all aside? You know, we don't think about that often. But if Jesus was fully God, fully man, tempted on all points even as we are, then he deliberately set aside, as a 33-year-old man, he was setting aside sexual appetites. He was setting aside natural human sex drive. And everything else. There were times when he didn't eat, where he didn't focus on his needs. And sometimes we use these things as excuses, you know, as men. We just do. Like, well, you know, my blood sugar's low. Well, get over it. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. Don't make it an excuse. Just do your duty. You know, and if you set the example of being the first one to do that, first one to submit to Christ, crucify your flesh, and put the needs of your wife above your own, she'll soon begin to trust and follow your leadership. You'll see her respond to that. And again, our focus has to be our own duty, and understanding that her needs are legitimate. The needs for attention, the needs for us to romance her, to do what we did when we dated her. Again, that's something else. It just hit me one day that what she was telling me, you're becoming the man I married. That thing, I realized, yeah. I faked her out completely in the beginning. I took her to nice restaurants. We did all kinds of stuff. And I was always thinking about what would be fun for her and what would be, what would she enjoy. It was all about her. Everything was all about her. And then overnight that changed because I had a job to do. I couldn't be thinking about what was going to be best. It's like, what's going to be fun for her tomorrow? I don't have time to think about that. I got 42 relief teams to deal with hurricane relief down here. I'm going to be gone 18 hours. I can't be thinking of, it's just, and I realized she got sold a bill of goods. And I needed to start doing my, at least working harder to fulfill that implicit promise. You see what I'm saying? To actually give her the man she married. I needed to make that a priority in my own life and start wooing her again. Start, in that sense, dating her again. Now, we don't have a date night every week. We try our best to spend, one evening a week together if at all possible, but it doesn't always work out. But we make it a priority to be sure we do it at least every other week, even if it's just sitting in the backyard. You see what I mean? Even if that's all it is, that we just get in the backyard and spend time together. Because she needs the connection, she needs the contact, especially if I've been traveling. 4 years ago, I left her behind for a month and went to Guatemala and went to language school. And it was the most aggravating thing in the world with the internet service to Skype. But we did it because we needed to maintain the connection. And you and I, as men, have to understand it. Now, ladies, you have to understand something about us too. Even those of us who seem to be the most emotionally reserved, many times what's going on is more of a learned control. When I was 16 years old, I completely blacked out, just in rage. And if you had told me up to that point that was possible, I don't think I would have believed it. But there was a guy in school that was just always obnoxious, and we were friends. But his idea of friendship, my idea of friendship weren't exactly in sync. So he always had vulgar nicknames for me, and he'd come walking up behind me and shove me and knock my books out of my arms. And, he didn't, nowadays they would call that bullying behavior. Well, he wasn't bullying me. That was just him playing, and I kept telling him, you need to stop doing that. And one day he just caught me at the wrong moment, and I literally lost my senses for a second. And when I came to, I was trying my best to choke the life out of him. I was literally strangling. I had him against the wall, strangling, and his eyes bugging out, and 2 or 3 guys pulling me off of him. And it scared me because I had completely blacked out, completely lost control. I had 2 situations like that made me realize this is dangerous. Surrendering to the emotion, giving oneself to the emotion. And you know what? A lot of us as men are aware. If I give in to this, it's not good. It's dangerous. And sometimes there's a reserve. My first assistant pastor, I'll never forget him sitting me down at one point wanting to talk to me about the fact that he said, you don't trust people. And I'd never thought about it until that moment. He said, you don't let people inside. And I realized, you're right. I don't trust people. And we have, you have to be aware of our, you being our wives, be understanding of our needs and our weaknesses, our battle, because sometimes we clam up and, as she puts it, crawl back into our cave in an effort to protect you from us.
How many of you guys are in the military or in law enforcement? Wow, a lot. Thank you for your service. Seriously. You understand something that we're still trying to learn about how battle rages. And I think one of the things that I had to realize was that I have no idea the battle that he faces day to day. Even before he was involved with law enforcement, just the battle of being a man in the world is different from what we face. It's a different war that attacks them. It's a different weight they carry for our protection and our responsibility. And to know that and to respect that is everything. There was one time where the kids were little and I came to him and do you mind if I just take the kids for 10 days and I go visit a friend? I need to get away from you because I can't take the moodiness I talked about last night. Please just let me get away and let me get a grip and figure out how to deal with this. And he was like, and then he listed off what he was facing in his world that made him this way. I'm facing all these things and now you're leaving me. That's how you're going to support me through it. And he's like, I wish you would study instead what it is I'm going through. Just try to put your understanding into it instead of going away from me and focus more on what you are feeling. And it was very convicting. And so for some reason, I did exactly what he said. I started researching, and I think so often God uses the wounds that we bring with us. He resurrects them in our marriage so that we can deal with them. And so he was reflecting back all to me the post-traumatic stress I had lived with as a child. He behaved exactly like that. And that forced me now as an adult to process it in a way I couldn't as a little girl. And so I went in and I found this book that I highly recommend if you're dealing with post-traumatic stress, especially if your spouse is, although it's a harsh book. It's called The Way Home, I think, or After the War. I can't remember. It's very harsh. It's not Christian. It's full of language. But I needed to understand it nonetheless. It's a Vietnam vet describing, it's his wife describing him coming home from the war. And what his behavior looked like to her, but then she did what I was trying to begin to understand. She tried to see what is he actually living with, what is going on inside him that makes him behave like this. And so she describes what he had seen. He will drive down the road and he sees coming towards the windshield some of what he saw in Vietnam coming against him. And it changed completely my outlook on Robert and on my dad. And all of a sudden I began to understand that with what he's dealing, he's doing amazing. It's just that I had no idea. It's so outside my experience what they're dealing with. And that just tells me that I'm spoiled and protected by them, that their behavior is protective instead of aggressive. And that changes everything to see that. Does that make sense? And so this book, it is rough. It's not like you don't give it to a teenage daughter or something. But because it is full of the language, there's absolutely no Christian awareness in it. But it gives you the raw experiences. The guy became an alcoholic and had to learn to function from scratch, and so did his wife. And this book, it was such a gift to me to understand both of these two important men in my life. And it really, in a way, it shamed me because I realized I'm standing here. How much of the time I think I'm spiritually superior because I don't carry the weight he carries. So my life is easier. And I found that so many women, wives, we think we're more spiritual than them because we have more time to read the Bible. We have more time to live it out in the way we think it should look. And a lot of times what we've been given as an ideal for how to live the Christian life, it's from a female slanted view. The guy who taught Love and Respect, have you heard of this study, Love and Respect? Edgeridge. Where he talks so much about how since the 60s, the whole viewpoint, media-wise and from Hallmark card to whatever you see, it's been slanted in, it's been feministized in the sense that it's not just given understanding of the feminine brain, it's expecting that men behave as women in so many ways. And so we think, and a lot of times even churches do this, they cater to women. They speak our language. They're doilies and there's chocolates and whatever. And it's made, even sitting still for so long is more female than male in a lot of ways. And so I began to realize how many of us consider ourselves more spiritual because it's easier for us to fit the mold than the men. And many wives tell me, I just wish he would read the Bible with me. I just wish we would have devotions. I have devotions with the kids. I do this, I do that, and he doesn't. And I used to struggle with that too, and I've talked to many pastors' wives who struggle with that too. And instead of, it doesn't help us, wives, to evaluate whether or not that's a justified desire. What helps is to let him off the hook completely and say, okay, God, show me what he is doing, because he's calling us to contentment and gratefulness. And for so many, including myself, once I took away what I thought Christianity should look like in him, what I thought a spiritual leader should look like, I put that aside. I was like, who is the spiritual man in front of me? What I saw is that whether or not he would teach the Bible to others, he lives it with us. He lives it with us, even when he's silent, even when he is in his cave. He lives it with us. And so many wives, the best thing we can do is to stop these, again, we talked about these expectations or entitlements of what he should be or do, and just accept what he is, the same way we would want to be accepted by him. Accept what he does do, instead of constantly having the measurement for what he doesn't. It'll never be enough. It will never be enough. I mean, we were marriage counseling one time with a couple, and he cooks breakfast for her every morning and serves it in bed, and she's discontent. It's a miserable marriage. Yeah, right? I'm like, no, because sometimes he's grumpy when he does it. While he lays in there, then he takes the kids to school.
He doesn't always do it with a good attitude. I mean,
no.
Sometimes when he brings it in, he's grumpy.
Yeah. And then he takes the kids to school so she can work out. And then, yeah, I know. And that's extreme. And I'm telling you, they've been married as long as we have. But they're not as happy as we are. And this is wise. He's constantly seeing what he's not doing. And that's a choice.
You have to surrender the expectations.
It's
whatever they are, you have to just give them back to him.
It literally is like taking a fish off the hook and let it back in the water. That hook of expectation. And that's, I think, my highest prayer for us is that if you do nothing else today, but take that husband or wife off the hook of your expectation, let them back in their natural habitat, and let them be what they are. And then appreciate that. Watch how they behave when they're not hooked up to you, to your expectations, because it quenches the spirit. It squashes us, no matter who we are, to be hooked to somebody's expectation. And at best, we can get a check mark that we did it. But usually that's not satisfying.
No, it's not. And one of the best ways I've ever heard it worded is, for both of us, husbands and wives, sometimes we put our spouse in the position that the best that they're ever going to be able to do is just barely measure up.
Yeah.
Well, that's not rewarding, right? I mean, and if we just surrender it and say, to the Lord, thank you for giving me this person, show me the things that I should be grateful for. Let me see who is really there and what you're doing, and, focus on the qualities again, like we talked about last night, and then begin to thank them and affirm them in those things, then it'll make some changes. But we put them in the position sometimes, it's like, no matter what they do, it's like, well, you should have been doing that all along. Thank God you finally started.
I'm telling you, how much is it? Because we've been unhappy for so long. Whatever you speak life to will grow. Whether it's, and you don't intend that, so if you speak negativity, that grows. If you speak affirmation, that grows. One of my favorite scriptures, I don't have it in my notes, can you find it? Ezekiel 16. It's not in my notes, but I really feel like we should look at it. Ezekiel 16, beginning in verse 6, actually in verse 4.
I can get this
if he can find it. What it talks about is really the spiritual condition we all have. It says, let me see it from there. Okay, as for your nativity, on the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor were you washed in water to cleanse you, nor were you rubbed with salt, nor wrapped in swaddling clothes. No eye pitied you to do any of these things for you, to have compassion of you, but you were thrown into the open field when you yourself were loathed on the day you were born. No matter our childhood, that is the human condition without God. That we are loathed and not cared for and not washed until He washes us. We're struggling in our own blood, in our own efforts, and it just leaves you feeling like you're in an open field fending for yourself. And that fight we take into marriage. If I don't do it, so nobody's going to do it. If I don't make him do it, I'm going to look after number one. I have to protect myself. All that we take with us into number one, into the marriage. And then, but here are the next two verses that are the most important to me. God said, when I passed by you and I saw you struggling in your own blood, I said to you in your blood, live. Yes, I said to you in your blood, live. And that's what we want to say to our spouses, live. I made you thrive like a plant in the field, and you grew, matured, and became very beautiful. Your breasts were formed, your hair grew, but you were naked and bare. That's sort of the first initial. That's a lot of times what we do when we're dating. You're beautiful, I love you, live. But then comes the commitment. And then that's when things begin to change. And he says in verse 8, and then I passed by you again, and I looked upon you, and indeed your time was the time of love. So I spread my wing over you and covered your nakedness. And that is what husbands do for us in a spiritual sense, whether we sense it or not. But if we would open our eyes and see it, they do it far more than we realize naturally. But this is God saying, yes, I swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine, says the Lord God. And then in that chapter, he continues to say how he washed and clothed her and made her more and more beautiful. And it's God speaking to I think, Jerusalem. I can't remember which city. But he kept beautifying her. And then it says at some point, but you trusted in your beauty. And you gave yourself away. And what happens in marriage, I mean, that's a whole different teaching in just spiritually, but in marriage what happens is you begin to trust in his affection. You begin to trust in his faithfulness, or in all the things that he does well. You trust in that. And then you begin to look around. What else is out there? What else could he be doing? What else should he be doing? Somebody else's husband's always doing something else for them. It is incredibly toxic and incredibly common to look around. And I mean, I used to do it all the time when we were newlyweds. Somebody, he's not naturally as physically affectionate as he is now. And I would watch husbands who were, and it would just be a knife in my heart. Why isn't he like that one? Why isn't he like this or like that? And instead of letting him off that hook and then seeing what he does do, how he has spread his wing of protection over me, and does it constantly. And many, many times, the times when I'm the most frustrated, because he does go deep into that cave, and I'm like, I'm standing at the door like, come out, and he's running further away into it, as most men do. That illustration is from Men is from Mars and Women are from Venus. Another non-Christian book that can be really helpful. Sometimes the non-Christian books can help us diagnose the problem. They can't give us the solutions. But sometimes the problems are more accurately described. And this one just gave us that illustration. And the more I come, it's like, come out. I need you to do this and I need you to do that. The more he wants to retreat, even if he does come out. And my goal is that he would want to come with me. And so I also have to go back and do what I did at first, which was allow him to woo me, allow him to come to me. Sometimes I'm totally off my notes. Because the warning, okay, I do have to be faithful to this. The warning from the curse was, because, he said to Adam, because you listen to your wife, this is your curse. Your work will be stressful. Because you listen to your wife, that happened. And as wives, that's an incredible responsibility, because we have more power than anyone realizes, and we think we would want it to influence him. But it's a sacred thing that's easily abused, like Eve did. So I think if we have driven them nuts and they don't want to please us, at least they want to appease us. and most of the time, right? Because they cannot live with a nagging wife. And with a wife, we think if we say it twice a year, we're saying nothing. He says, you know, that's nagging. You mentioned that 3 years ago. No need bringing it up again. And I'm like, right?
On my list.
It's on. I actually found, I stumbled on something on Facebook where somebody said, when a guy says he'll fix it, he will. There's no need to remind him every 6 months. And it's like, but here's the point of it, though. Here's the power that we have that we abuse so much. We, like, pointing here. No matter our personality. Sometimes I identify more with the men, I have more, whatever. No matter the personality. The man is wired so that he does need, as the leadership, he needs to hear from God. And a lot of times we think, well, I'm helping you. I'm explaining how it needs to be. So I'm helping you hear God. And the more I'm helping him hear God, the less he can hear any of us. He tuned both of us out. It's so powerful to stop talking. I mean, it really is a powerful tool.
Ladies, that's the most profound thing. Say that again.
This is the wisdom of 23 years of marriage from somebody who talks a lot. It's really powerful to be quiet, not because you're giving up, not in resentment, not in like in a huff and a puff because he's never going to get it anyway. Not that. But to truly be quiet and say, okay, God, it's on you. I'm going to trust you to make it right. And I don't even know what that is.
That's what this comes down to for both of us, men and women. Trusting God. If He put you together, if you're together, He put you together. You know, I had a student many, many years ago came to me and said, what do you do if you realize you married the wrong man? I said, well, you come to grips with the fact he's the right one now.
Yeah.
You didn't surprise God when you did that. You know, you may realize, oh, no, but you didn't surprise God. He knew, you know, in His foreknowledge. And so if you've now, you're joined together as husband and wife under God, well, then you need to trust God to work His perfect will in that relationship. You need to trust God to lead the husband to be the leader. Husbands, trust God to work in your wife's life. You fulfill your duty to her. Do what your responsibility, and then leave the rest of it up to Him. That, for me, I talked about in the beginning, there were things that drove me crazy. I mean, really drove me crazy. And I realized one day, I'm not helping God in this situation. I'm interfering with God in this situation. And I need to stop focusing on trying to fix her. That's God's responsibility. I can't do a thing about it. I need to thank Him for giving her to me and trust that He knew what He was doing when He did it. And do you see what I mean? And just trust God with all of that. And I'm really glad I did. Because think about this now. We had a good 3 years that were miserable. Both of us. As I talked about yesterday. We've had 20 that have been really good. And they're getting better and better. And I read an article, and actually I didn't read it. Pastor that we sent to Peru many years ago shared with me a study, indicated that they interviewed a whole bunch of couples that had been married more than 40 years, and they asked them, you know, what was the turning point when you look back and it's like, man, that's when it really got good. You know what they came up with? Year 27. That's what I said. Year 27. That's when it really got awesome.
No, but the rest is foreplay. The rest is getting you there, and it's worth it. And what we want to do, I'm just aware of the time now. What we want to do.
That's code for Robert Hush.
No, both of us hush. It's just 2 minutes. They got to go to lunch. But what we want to do is, before we hush, is we gave you these questions that we totally veered away from. But you have them, and we suggest that you take the questions that are there and just maybe first fill them out individually and then compare them when you feel ready, but fill them out individually. But the two things we've hoped to accomplish, let me just emphasize that again before we pray, is that you let your spouse off I mean, really think of it as that fish. Let them off that hook of whatever it is you're holding them to. And that's that one thing that keeps you dissatisfied with them, whatever that is. Let them off that habit of thinking or that expectation or entitlement, whatever it is. And we're not talking about infidelity or abuse. We're talking about other life issues. Does that make sense? We're not talking about something that is an entirely different category. Everything else, let them off the hook, let them back in the water, and then watch what they do. I mean, it's beautiful to watch what somebody do when they're free. It's for freedom Christ has set you free. Do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Do not be entangled in your marriage. Be free. That's the goal of it. So our prayer is that you let each other, only you can let the other one off the hook. What they do is between them and God. And then once they're free, trust God with them. And really, the beautiful thing is to then watch what He does. Like an adventure. Watch what happens when that fish is back in the water and they swim free and you're not there to control it. What happens? It's beautiful. It's only then that you see the fullness of what God has created them to be and then your marriage to be.
Yeah, you didn't marry a perfect person, and that's not going to change. You know, we have to remember that. A good friend of ours is in his 80s, and he would always say, a good marriage is built on redemption, not perfection. There are no perfect people. Forgive one another. Recognize that there will always be things to forgive in your partner. And, just trust God with it, and you do the best you can do. Father, again, I thank you for all these people who've gathered together. They've gathered together because, Lord, they want your guidance. They want your help. Lord, they acknowledge that they need your mercy in their lives. They need your grace. Lord, your enabling power to be what you've called them to be, designed them to be, to fulfill the duties that you've entrusted, the responsibilities that you've entrusted to them. Lord, I pray for them that you would guide them. I pray for the men in this room that you would give us all understanding concerning our wives first, also our daughters and our granddaughters. Give us understanding, Lord, so that we can fulfill our duty and be to them and for them what they need. And I pray for these wives too, that God, that you would give them wisdom, that you would help them to see and not just cope with, but appreciate what you've put in their men, to understand and be able to serve and minister to the men you've entrusted to their care as well, Father. We thank you so much. Thank you for the way you've loved us. You didn't hold anything back. You set such an incredible example of humility and giving yourself sacrificially to us and for us. Lord, we love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.